KeysKidsChannel. Keys Kids Channel. Hi kids, and welcome back to the Keys Kids channel. And I'm Miss Keys. We are back for another episode in our In Between the Lines series. But before we get to that, you guys, it's February! And you know what that means. That's right, you guys. It is Black History Month. Yay! I am so excited. So, in America, the month of February is when we take the time to celebrate Black history. In the past, the Black community has been put through a lot of horrible things, but they overcame. And in that, you also had these wonderfully amazing leaders in the Black community. So during the month of February, we are going to take time and speak about some of those people, read about some of those people. And I am just so excited to share this with you guys. It is very important for us to talk about our history so that we can learn from our history and always do better. To begin this journey, we are going to read the classic story, the story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Cole and George Ford. Ruby Bridges, I don't even know where to begin. This little girl, was so strong and so brave that I had to start off February with her. This was a sweet little Black girl who was one of the first children to be integrated into an all-white school in New Orleans, Louisiana of all places. Now, back in the day, the South was a dangerous place to be if you were Black. But this little girl decided to not only be brave, but overcome that very valid fear of what she was doing. She is an inspiration to me, so I am so excited to share that with you. Now, even though we're now reading nonfiction books, you guys know what nonfiction means, right? Well, nonfiction books are stories that are true. They can be about people, animals, things, but these are true stories, real events about these real people, places, or things. So we're reading a nonfiction book about Ruby Bridges. Now, even though this is a nonfiction, that doesn't mean we can't find the theme. These Black historians always have an amazing theme, whether it be perseverance, whether it be strength, bravery, resilience. These books have a phenomenal theme. So while we are reading, I want you guys to be looking for the theme, the message, the moral, the lesson this person has been through and wanted to share with you. I am so excited! Oh my God, okay. With all that being said, you guys, are you guys ready to read? Well then put on your reading hat and let's go! The Story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Cole, illustrated by George Ford. I want to take a second to tell you guys that this book is a biography. A biography is just a story that someone has written about someone else's life. And today, Robert Cole is sharing Ruby Bridges' life with us. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. "We were very poor. Very poor," Ruby said. "My daddy worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops. So my daddy lost his job, and that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I was 4, I think." In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day. After they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. "We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit," Ruby's mother said. "We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start." At that time, Black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The Black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's law. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 Black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the girls were sent to Maddow 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to 1st grade in the William Frantz Elementary School. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in history. They went to church. "We sat there and prayed to God," Ruby's mother said, "that we'd all be strong and we'd have the courage and we'd get through any trouble. And Ruby would be a good girl and she'd hold up her head high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all the American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard." On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the Frantz Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want Black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did not help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. Every day, for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to the Frantz school surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair, and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed towards her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone, except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with, to eat lunch with. But every day, Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. "She was polite, and she worked well at her desk," Mrs. Henry said. "She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught." So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom, an empty building. "Sometimes I look at her and wonder how she did it," said Mrs. Henry. "How she went by those mobs and sat there all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and comfortable." Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she gradually began to wear down, or even decide that she no longer wanted to go to school. Then one morning, something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom, as she usually did, watching Ruby walk towards the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped, right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there facing all those men and women. She seemed to be talking to them. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into the school. When she went into the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked with the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. "I didn't stop and talk with them," she said. "Ruby, I saw you talking," Mrs. Henry said. "I saw your lips moving." "I wasn't talking," said Ruby. "I was praying. I was praying for them." Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning, she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said the prayer she repeated twice a day, before and after school. "Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So if you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago, when they said terrible things about you." Afterword. Later that year, 2 white boys joined Ruby at the Frantz Elementary School. Their parents were tired of seeing the boys get into mischief around the house, when they could have been at school and learning. The mob became very angry when the first white students went back to school, but those boys were soon joined by other children. "We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to take the law into our own hands," one parent said. "It's time for us to fight for the side of the law and for our children's right to go to school and get their education." They all did get their education. Ruby and a growing number of boys and girls who went to school with her. By the time Ruby was in the 2nd grade, the mobs had given up their struggle to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that New Orleans schools be desegregated so that children of all races might be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to the Frantz School. She graduated from it, then went on to graduate from high school. Ruby Bridges is married to a building contractor and has 4 sons. Now a successful businesswoman, she has created the Ruby Bridges Educational Foundation, with its focus on education, community, and the future of our nation's children. The foundation is especially dedicated to revitalizing the William Frantz School, which is located in the heart of the 9th Ward in New Orleans. Ruby is once again stepping to the forefront and embracing an opportunity to make history by contributing to the challenge that our nation is facing in the recovery efforts following Hurricane Katrina. There is also a special exhibit featuring Ruby's story at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis in Indianapolis, Indiana, called "The Power of Children, Making a Difference." The end. What an amazing story. Ruby Bridges was 6 years old when she decided to be so brave. She didn't cry, she didn't yell, she didn't scream. Not only that, she prayed for the people who didn't like her. Ruby Bridges is amazing and she inspires me every day. Before we get to the theme, I want to read the blurb in the back of the book, which gives us a little more insight into who Ruby Bridges was. It says, civil rights activist. Hello, I'm Ruby Bridges. In 1960, I was the first Black child to integrate an all-white elementary school, William Frantz Elementary in New Orleans, Louisiana. Over the years, I have dedicated my life to promoting tolerance and unity. During this civil unrest, it is crucial we stand united to protect Black and brown lives. Thank you so much Thank you so, so much, Robert Coles and George Ford, for giving this biography of the wonderfully amazing Ruby Bridges. Now, with all that being said, even though we're reading a nonfiction story, it's time to find the theme. That's right, you guys. What was the theme of the story of Ruby Bridges? Well, for me, the theme was bravery. And I've even said it a million times in this one episode. But Ruby Bridges was just a little girl in a very dangerous situation. But she decided to not only be brave, but to be kind. I think the message that she gave us is even when times are so hard, even when people are being mean and horrible, remember to still be kind and be brave. Be brave enough to stand up for what is right, but still show that love and kindness. I think this is a phenomenal story that everyone should read at least once or a million times in their life. Ruby Bridges is an inspiration, and this episode is dedicated to her. Now, don't forget, Monday on the KeysKidsChannel Instagram, you'll find our next nonfiction book in the In Between the Lines series. And then Saturday, right here on the KeysKidsChannel YouTube, you'll find me reading to you. Please don't forget to go like, subscribe, share with everyone you know, and leave a comment below. And with all that said, guys, it's time to go. But no worries, because I'm going to see you guys next week on the KeysKidsChannel. Bye! KeysKidsChannel. See you next week.